everybody. This is Mrinalini Rai, and I'm the Director for Women for Biodiversity. And I have the great pleasure to invite you for this event today that we are organizing. So before I begin, I just want to make sure that we have everything set up here. All right, so let's begin. Thank you very much for waiting. So today, before I begin, I will share with you some of the logistics for our webinar. So today our webinar is on Her Safety is Priority, Voices from the Global South in Addressing Gender Inequalities and Advancing Human Rights in the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So warm welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us. Before I begin, I also would like to share that we have interpretation. So if you would like to use that service, we have interpretation being provided in Spanish. So a few of the guidelines for all of you attending is first is if you are in the chat, you're familiar with it, when asking a question or your introductions, please feel free to add or write your comments into your introductions, and please refer your name and organization so that we also know who are joining us and from where. And the questions in chat, please type your questions and comments in the chat box. Indicate your country and for who among the speakers your question is for. This is a roundtable dialogue, so we will try our best to have our speakers taking the floor and answering as many queries as you may have, but just in case, please feel free to also add them to the chat. Language, as I said, we're also providing the interpretation in Spanish. So if you are familiar, if you look at your Zoom window at the bottom, you will see this sign called interpretation, which is like a globe. So please choose Spanish for the event. Click on the globe in the Zoom button below and select Spanish. If you have any difficulty hearing the interpretation, please let us know. We also have our technical colleagues here who will help us sort it out. So thank you very much. I'll give a moment for our colleagues who would want to go to the Spanish room before I move forward with the introductions. Okay. So once again, thank you and a warm welcome to everybody. Today's session is a virtual dialogue, and we are very happy to have our colleagues joining us to share their experiences and to also be here to answer any of the queries that you may have and also to engage in an interactive dialogue. So first, we have, before I go on the introductions, what we have is we have Ida. I hope I'm not able to see my screen now. She was having some internet problem. But for Ida Akau is the Vice President and Coordinator of the Network of Indigenous Peoples in Solomon Islands. Ida works in the field of sexual and gender-based violence, women's empowerment, youth empowerment, community development, and biodiversity conservation initiatives, and using traditional knowledge. She's a strong advocate for gender equality and equity, social justice, climate justice, human rights, and works on the recognition of the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, and especially of women as important partners in biodiversity conservation and climate resilience. Next, our speaker is Leia Chularatna, who is a manager of the Indigenous Women's Network of Thailand, IWNT. As an Indigenous woman herself from the north of Thailand, Leia is committed to work and advocate for the rights of Indigenous women in Thailand. She has over a decade of experience in working in capacity development of Indigenous women in leadership, policy and advocacy, including conducting research and documenting case studies on Indigenous peoples and related issues, including human rights violations against Indigenous women in Thailand. Another of our speakers is Edna Katoyo, who is a policy and partnership advisor for the Pastoral Communities Empowerment Program in Kenya. Edna is a social development specialist, Indigenous people's rights and climate and gender justice advocate. She has a focus on environmental governance, human and Indigenous people's rights, and sustainable development projects and policy for over 15 years. Edna is passionate about sustainable development and the promotion of interdisciplinary approaches to capacity development, project design, and the project implementation and policy. So a warm welcome to our speakers. Now, a little bit about why we are here. Gender-based inequalities are pervasive across the world, impacting not only the social, cultural, economic, or legal rights of women, but also affecting their ability to equally and effectively participate in policy and decision-making spaces that impacts their lives and their dignity. The violence also extends to women's relationship with the environment, particularly in their access and control of natural resources, environmental pressures and threats, and environmental actions to defend and conserve ecosystem and resources. There have been coming up with a lot of research that showcases that women represent majority of the world's poor, landless, illiterate, and informal, as well as unpaid workforce. Today's event also is particularly important because for us, we are also hosting and organizing this event as a follow-up of a similar event we held on October 11th, a high-level event on advancing gender considerations in the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which we hosted parallel to the opening of the first part of the CBD COP15 that took place in Kunming. This is also an event in response and in parallel with this year's 16 Days of Activism, Orange the World and Violence Against Women Now. And we started this campaign, Her Safety is Priority, on the 25th of November. And today, it takes place as we celebrate the Human Rights Day today on December 10th. So with this further ado of looking at it, this is what we would want the objectives for this webinar as a dialogue. The event is intended to provide a space and platform for practitioners, community members, experts, and other knowledge holders. This also invites to exchange knowledge, experience, and strategies, review, analyze, and recommend actions in advancing women's equality and human rights in the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and consider strategic advocacy tools and identify cooperation opportunities ahead. Before we go to the speakers, we have one last slide to show us of our campaign hashtags. So please, if you are there, if you are social media savvy, this is our to support our campaign. Please share your insights on the event in social media and use the hashtags, hashtag Her Safety is Priority, hashtag Women for Biodiversity, and hashtag Agenda for Women Now, and tag us. So with this, I will give the floor to first of our speakers, Edna. So before we go, I had also asked them that besides giving the introduction of their organization, I would want them to take a minute or two to help us get a glimpse of where they are from, the work they're doing, and something about themselves. So Edna, you have the floor.
Thank you, Tina, and good morning, all that have joined us, or good evening for other people who have joined as well from different parts of the globe. I'm joining in from Kenya, apologies if my voice is lower. I will support in terms of advisory capacity, pastoral communities empowerment program, but as well held previous roles and also worked with various indigenous peoples communities in Kenya, and also interacted and engaged with other work globally and also regionally on social development aspects, focused on advocacy and on policy, and also implementation of initiatives focused on environmental governance, sustainable development, and also rights issues. I support advisory capacity for pastoral communities empowerment program, which is an indigenous-led non-governmental organization that works in Kenya. And the work that it does is focused on indigenous people self-determined development. And within this work, it supports a lot of work that looks at integrating indigenous people's rights, ecosystem based approaches, and also traditional knowledge and sustainable self-determined development, while ensuring gender equality as well is addressed. It works on peace issues within the community, and also has a component focused on enhancing gender equality and women empowerment, including youth agenda. PASIP as well has been working. It was established in 2008, and also further on recently during COVID period as well, started a network of indigenous women locally that brings together indigenous women as a platform to try and strengthen their engagement, and also to enhance women's leadership, not only in access to public resources where it had started to strengthen their capacity and also public goods and also leadership, but also to strengthen women engagement in other aspects of their life in environmental governance. And so women, more than 30 indigenous women group were able to come as a platform locally in a county where we are based in West Pokot, to try and deliberate on their priorities so that they're best able to engage with the devolved governance system in our country. So I'd like to end there, and I'll be able to share more in the upcoming session. Thank you, Tina. Back. Tina, you're on mute.
After so many virtual sessions, you still have these glitches. No, I'm saying, so Edna, thank you so much for this introduction, because I really wanted our attendees to really have a scope that even in this virtual space, we are just calling in from different spaces and also different locations, and just geographically, and the work that we are doing and the communities that are undertaking, especially during this COVID time, has been quite challenging, especially for women working on the ground. So thank you so much. Next is, I would like to invite Leia from Thailand to also share a little bit about her work, or the organization's work, and a little bit about herself. Leia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Tina, for the opportunities, and also I would like also to thank the organizers of this event now for giving me and my organization the opportunities to speak to speak, because how to say, we not often that we have the opportunities to speak and to voice out now. Hi, my name is Leia, and as Tina already introduced, now that I am from the north of Thailand, from Chiang Mai, Chiang Mai of Thailand, and I am with the Indigenous Women's Organization, or IWNT in short, now. And the main mandate now of my organization is to try to bring the voice of the women into the table now, and also to make sure that the issues of women are being discussed now and being put on the table, because as in many countries now, women, indigenous women especially now, seems to be among those marginalized groups, and many times we are left, our voice are left out, and sometimes also because of us, now we are not confident enough to speak and also to stand up for our rights. So one very important of my organization is to try to build capacity and also to make sure that the voice of indigenous women are being heard and also put on the table for discussion. So thank you for having me, and yeah.
Thank you, Leia, for the brief introduction. I'm really happy that you are also joining us. You know, you always talk with the challenges of the language, but I think you do an amazing job of building a very strong messages of Indigenous women in the forests that you go to. So thank you so much for joining for this event. Next, Ida, I'm happy to hear you were able to join us with all the challenges of the internet. So could you please take a moment and share with us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your work that you've been doing in Solomon Islands?
Thank you, Tina, and thank you, everyone. It's a very rare opportunity for me to be able to join in this webinar, and I am very appreciative for the chance. Yeah, I will talk a little bit about our local NGO. It's called because I believe, Tina, you've already introduced. I actually came in after, so
Either we lost you. I hope it's only me. Hello?
We can't hear you.
I think we lost her connection again.
Yeah, we can hear you, but we cannot hear her.
Yeah, okay, all right. Yeah, no, I think, okay, Amelia or tech team, do let me know when she enters the room again. All right. So I think, no, thanks for the introductions. I just wanted all the speakers to give their own personal introductions because they're doing some amazing work on the ground, and I'm always in awe of the work that they've been carrying out, considering the challenges of these 2 years during the COVID, where financing has been challenging, access to going to the field trips have been challenging, and also looking at some of the local responses that that some of our members are taking, have taken during this COVID times, like what how Leia was talking about. Some COVID-19 has been challenging in these times, and access has been very difficult in the communities, but women are actually one of the change makers who've been, you know, being a key role in maintaining the well-being of communities, also of children. So having said that, we will wait for Ida to come in, but I will also start the discussion both with Jumyu and Edna, is that, you know, looking at this today's day is International Human Rights Day, and the theme is around addressing inequality and, you know, human rights for all. And hi, Ida. All right, before I go join in, Ida, would you like to take the moment to give a short introduction? Share 1 minute of yourself? Okay. You have the floor.
thank you, Tina. Okay, so yeah, NIPS views that, NIPS upholds the conviction that indigenous lands and resources are more valuable to indigenous people than the government's general view of the economy and resources. And we view that they are life itself and have an integral and spiritual value for the communities, and that they are fundamental to social, cultural, spiritual, economic, and political survival of different indigenous people groups in Solomon Islands. So NIPS is purposely incorporated to address the issues of interest and challenges to Indigenous peoples as landowners of the lands, territories, resources in the Solomon Islands, with the intention to create and maintain a cohesive group of Indigenous people from Solomon Islands, providing opportunities to gather and dialogue, foster educational opportunities, developing trust, relationship, sharing resources, and speaking with a common voice towards cultural identity, peace, reconciliation, and collective goals. And we want to provide a network for cooperation and development of Indigenous interest. And also we strive for understanding of dynamics of Indigenous people and societies, and to share some understanding with the broader community. And some of our works also, we organize various programs, activities to share information about the develop an understanding of the economic, social, and political development needs of Indigenous people in Solomon Islands, in the region, and the world at large. And we also want to create and produce educational materials through print or radio, the thematic areas of the Convention on Biological Diversity affecting Indigenous people, and also to ensure the recognition is given to women, girls, underrepresented, and the diverse groups who are important stakeholders to conservation biodiversity in local communities as well. And we want to work hard to take immediate action on the impacts of climate change in the local communities in the Solomon Islands through projects, and ensure that proper assistance and recognition is given to the local communities as well. And also facilitate economic empowerment to enhance livelihood and ensure social justice and gender-based ways in the local community. I think that's a bit of our work. Thank you very much, Tina.
Thank you, Ida, for sharing with us the work that NIFS is doing on the rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities to their territories, and also including ensuring that there is a gender responsive approach included in the work that you're doing. So my question, Alec was talking with all of you, is with your experience and the diversity of ecosystems that you all represent in a way, you know, Edna, you're coming up from Kenya, different landscape versus Leia, you know, you're working with the pastoral communities, you know, you're working with the forest communities, and Ida, the marine. So right now, there's a big discussion on biodiversity conservation with the Post2020 and this new framework that is being talked about. And today's day, International Human Rights Day, and the 16 days of activism, looking at gender equality and gender-based violence. Looking all that, you know, it's a very big pot of things to combine. But from your experience, I want to know, when you're talking about, you know, the intersectionality of environmental justice, and you're talking about gender justice, some of the challenges that you may have faced, or also some responses that you may have followed up in your work that you may have come across. So I just want to kind of create maybe in a baseline of sorts, and then start the discussion on some of the other recommendations that could go forward. So just looking at that intersectionality, Edna, hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Tina, for the question, and also noting that the theme of the discussion as well, given this month of gender activism on ending GBV, and especially in environment. I think just to bring you to note, past years, there was a gender assessment in forest areas looking at issues of inclusion. And it covered 20 counties of Kenya, and it looked at issues of access of Indigenous women in terms of forest resources, their engagement in the leadership, and also other aspects. And I think what came out as well strongly was issues of incidents of gender-based violence, even though it wasn't one of the areas they were trying to look at in terms of looking at inclusion. I think coming to the discussion in terms of the post-2020 biodiversity framework, there's a lot of discussion on issues, and we've also seen even locally a lot of aspects talking about ensuring inclusion in environmental governance. We have it in key policies and also in our constitution, but I think there is a key gap in terms of really looking at addressing inequality issues, especially gender, and of course, as well as really having key policy, progressive language in our policies, because we have gender policies in place as well. But I think really having that integrated into the agreements and also having as part of the policies of program gender equality and socially inclusive approach is really missing. And in working with Indigenous women, one of the key areas we see in terms of gap, especially in environmental conservation, Indigenous women being in the front lines, whether in using resources and also in defending these lands and territories and important resources for their communities. The kind of challenges we've seen is the gaps in terms of having them in leadership spaces, even though they're really, the study came out with findings that Indigenous women really are working more on conservation than men. And also that they're also engaging youth and also transferring this kind of leadership role and mentoring the young as well. And so the inclusion in decision making, there was a gap identified. Also, there has been a challenge in terms of really issues of access and control of resources as well. Then there is also issues in terms of capacity building and learning. And this is a key component that is missing because as Indigenous women, they thrive by learning and also strengthening their capacity and engaging with others. And there has been that target. We also see that in terms of natural resource management, there is a disconnect amongst the different policy, whether it's in land, whether it's in or whether it's in land rights, or whether it's in those for securing other, like in forest policies. So there is a disconnect in these policies, environmental policies, and also when there's disconnect in that, also it affects the way people are engaged. And I think a lot of them are also, we have different conservation approaches that are gender blind. Most are not informed by a gender analysis that looks in terms of powers, in terms of control and access use, and also management of these resources. And also you see some will also continue burdening women and also affect. But I think also what is important is aspects of rights of people, and especially Indigenous women's rights. That is a key challenge that is missing, and especially a key one, having tenure rights. And I think this is more as well in terms of challenges presented where we have aspects of government gazetted areas or forests, for instance, or even protected areas that limits access use, even though we have a participatory forest management model, but still those models are flawed, and also we've seen abuse of power and exacerbation of violence against women, whether physical violence, even when they're accessing simple resources like collecting firewood for subsistence use. And we've seen women that bear scars for many years from assault received, and they do not know where to report or where to seek help because the perpetrators are in power. Yeah, back to you, Tina.
Right. No, thank you. I think, Edna, it was a lot of information, and exactly, like, I think it's not an easy question to really answer because it has got a lot of multiple facets to it. You know, you talked about the gender policies. Of course, there are some gender policies in place, but the interpretation of how those policies are then advancing women's rights has always been a challenge. Also, I think when I started off saying, you know, the challenges that women have in all spheres of their life, you know, cultural, economic, legal, a lot that I see has got to do with this really fundamental right, is tenure rights, especially in the, you're talking about, actually, I think all spheres that you're talking about Indigenous women, you talk about rural women, and recognition of identity of Indigenous women. I think this is, again, a debate that keeps coming up, and I'll go to Leia, June, to you. Knowing Thailand and knowing the work that you were doing, talk about rights, recognize the rights of Indigenous peoples. Here we are talking about rights of Indigenous women. Some of the challenges that you have come across, and your perspective, and how how it has progressed, or some of the work that you've been working on those issues.
Okay, thank you. Please bear with my English also. No, I will try to speak, but if something is not clear, now you can always ask me. Now, the challenge for us here in Thailand is that the rights and also the identity of the indigenous people is not recognized now by the governments, and also in our communities now the existence, and also sometimes now there's no confidence now in the capacity of the women now, because men always mostly now men always see women as someone who cannot do anything, who can only follow the order of the men now. So when you cannot, when you don't recognize now the existence and also the capacity of the that people, now that group of people, the women, meaning now you are not including now their voice in your planning, in your decision, in your policies, and in Thailand, the challenge is that we are considered as the minority groups now, and we are considered as the people who are living in the forest and who are not supposed to live there. No? The forest is our house, our homes, our land, but we are not allowed now to live there. The governments always they have many ideas, they have many policies. Now they want to how to say, restore now the biodiversity. Now they want to increase the forest areas, but at the same time, they don't really recognize that, oh, they are indigenous people there, and they are the one who live with the forest. They are the one who preserve and who maintain the biodiversity now in those areas. So the problem now, I think the challenge and the problem for us here in Thailand is about the non-recognitions now of the indigenous people and also indigenous women. Now their involvement in maintaining the biodiversity now in the areas. That's one of the challenge for us.
Yeah, no, thanks, June, for sharing that. And I think, again, this is to kind of bring in the discussion that we always keep having. You're talking about equality, you're talking about human rights, but just the basic right of even being recognized, belonging to, an identity of a community itself. Where do you even start? And especially if you talk about indigenous women, I've heard a lot by colleagues and members saying that, we have, as women, but also as indigenous women, we always have double or triple marginalization just because of multiple entities we embody within ourselves, which needs to be recognized and which we cannot stereotype. And I think that's sometimes what policies try to do, is they try to stereotype policies. And as Edna was talking about, and that is the reason why a lot of the policies are usually gender blind, because there are stereotype roles of what role that women play or they can do or cannot do, which really also, like you said, does not create an enabling environment for women to really then take the opportunity to be part of decisions that impact their lives. I think I will again go to Ida. Ida, from your experience also, because you're working with environmental issues, but also specific to your work, you also work with gender-based violence, and just how some of those challenges that you faced in your work and how there has been some responses, would be happy to have you share that with us.
Okay, thank you, Tina. I think with the modern practices, there are many models and practices used in the use of natural resources in biodiversity and in biodiversity conservation restoration. However, I'm not in the position to critique or recommend any models or practice used, but I believe that whatever models or practices used, it has to be contextualized, where in the sense where it fits the local biodiversity context, the cultures, tradition, and people. And whatever models or practice used, we must ensure that there is full participation of Indigenous and local communities in the processes, especially women. And I'm saying this because a lot of the models that are introduced, they are from outside coming into the community. So it's sometimes it can be challenging for the people in the community to adapt, but not in many cases. That's why I'm recommending that it's contextualized. And it is very important that whatever models we use, we have to ensure that there is full participation of women and in all the processes as well, decision-making, whatever projects that are implemented for conservation of biodiversity, we have to include women because women are very important stakeholders, even if they are not heard or seen in a lot of reports. On the community level, women work a lot in biodiversity conservation because they use it a lot, especially for food and also for medicine. And we are women in the communities always look after the kids. So we care more about the livelihood. So biodiversity is part and parcel of that. I also would like to comment on protected areas, like Edna has said before. We do have a Protected Areas Act, but sometimes because we don't have a lot of land in areas, and if there is an area protected under Protected Areas Act, there is no freedom for people to access resources because it won't allow people to access for a very long period of time. But to me, if we use the local traditional way of conserving, it will allow people to access the resources as well. And then we know how to look after it using a traditional knowledge where we can put them aside for a certain period of time, but not as long as required by the law using the Protected Areas Act. So that's one thing I believe. And also we have in a lot of areas in many provinces and communities, we have FAD. It's what they call fishing aggregated device, where they placed outside the area, so people marine area, so that to conserve the reefs, and then people can access tuna. So with this, I believe we should encourage more women to be involved in accessing this FAD, because not a lot of women are engaged in this. Maybe a policy should be in place to allow and also to encourage women participation, because women are left to use other economic activities to support the family, which do not really get much income for them. So for communities in Solomon Islands, I believe if we encourage more women to participate in this, it will help us. And in terms of gender-based violence, we've recently heard a lot of a rise in the community, in the provinces of sexual gender-based violence. We recently had a case in October where a young 10-year-old girl was sexually assaulted and then was murdered. It is very important that so it shows how vulnerable our women are. Whatever activities we include our women in terms of conservation of biodiversity, we must ensure that the times are safe for them to go in places like the forest or sea, because it will put them in a position that they are vulnerable to perpetrators of violence. So to ensure that, I think local communities need to be aware of that as well. And advocacy work need to also come from everywhere, from the government, from organizations that also work in conservation of biodiversity. We have to include that as well in our capacity building, that these things, our work also puts our women in vulnerable positions. I think that's my contribution for now.
No, Ida, thank you so much. I think this is really very important, and it really binds in some of the aspects that we wanted to also look into. You know, we're talking about the campaign is her safety is priority. And I think looking at what Edna and June were talking about, you know, that's what I'm saying, we talk about rights, we talk about guidelines, we talk about policies, but we somehow tend to miss out some of the very intricate actions, or, you know, I couldn't call it simple rules or procedures or principles as a safety of, you know, how policies would even go beyond just not looking at statistics, but also put in place some of those, I don't know, how will you call it, holistic approaches or social approaches to ensure that women's rights, women's and girls' rights, and right to a healthy environment, equality, just has all these multiple facets that needs to be considered when planning or putting in place any kind of work at either the national level or the local level. Of course, I think this has always been a challenge because, you know, you have to really also look into, it is a lot of work, but I think it should be done. And their safety, like I said, I think we're talking about conservation, we're talking protected areas, we're talking about cases where I think Leia, you or Edna talked about, you know, when they even go for firewood collection, they are vulnerable to perpetrators and at risk. I think having said that, let me just take a break. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the chat box. Also for our attendees, if you do have a question or even an insight or reflection, please feel free to share it on the chat. We are just kind of having this dialogue. We thought it would be interesting to just, open the floor. So please feel free to direct any question towards us so we could be able to respond to, or if you have any specific questions for the speakers to answer, we would be happy for them to take them. So having said this, to all three of you, this whole, recently, there are too many things happening. Recently, you also had a Human Rights Council resolution on a right to healthy environment. Now, within that context, we are engaging in the CBD's Post2020, basically the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, which is trying to put this blueprint for next 30 years for biodiversity conservation. Now, looking at these challenges of women, this is what we wanted to highlight, why women need to be part of the biodiversity discussion, why women's rights need to be reflected in those biodiversity framework to ensure that any policies and planning that takes place beyond whatever the framework is going to get adopted ensures that it is truly gender responsive. So based on that, I think either you did briefly get into that, but again, I'll start maybe with Edna again for you. When you talk about gender responsive approaches in biodiversity conservation, what would you envision? Like, what would be a gender responses, rights-based approach to conservation that ensures recognition of the contributions that women make?
Thank you, Tina, for the question, and also really for sharing that the resolution by the Human Rights Council. And I think first to start, for parties and different stakeholders, including the women constituency, the Women for Biodiversity, I think a lot of submissions that were made before in terms of what they want to see in the post-2020 framework, biodiversity framework, was that really that gender issues should be incorporated in the process of developing the post-2020 framework. And I think people saw a gap in terms of when you don't address gender issues, and especially looking at the linkages it has with biodiversity conservation and also sustainable use, then we are going to miss out on a key group and also a key component that needs to be addressed. And I think coming to your question in terms of the framework itself, I think a lot of what we want to see as key element and what has been missing really in biodiversity conservation initiatives and also whatever different levels and also in policy is that a lot of them have not been informed by gender analysis. So you find that even though sometimes you have different efforts made, there isn't really a specific toolkit that informs the design of these initiatives and also the development. And so you find that even, for instance, you have the National Biodiversity Strategic Action Plan, they'll just mention inclusion of women, but really there isn't a deliberate effort at different levels to look at what are the gaps in terms of gender issues, what are the priorities that need to be addressed, what are the inequality or structural issues that are there that impede engagement of women in this. And I think more looking at it more broadly as well, I think policy lacks a progressive language, and we have a lot of policies in place, but I think looking at contextualized areas, like we have advancement in terms of community land rights, for instance, in Kenya, that is really progressive in terms of strengthening women access and also women land rights, but having guidelines really to take forth such measures is missing. So there isn't a lot of also resources provided that is adequate, whether technical or financial, really to build into the gender issues and also addressing gender gaps when initiatives are being started for conservation. And you will have even initiatives, for instance, that are looking at addressing stakeholder engagement. So there'll be a budget for that. Why not have a budget and a segment under stakeholder engagement, really looking at how do we really advance women's engagement in this and strengthen inclusion of women in management and such. And I think also a lot of strategies as well that advance are not looking at really ensuring that they respect traditional and customary practices and also governance structures that are already there. And I think a lot of it leaves gaps. And as well with these challenges, I think the burden has been left on Indigenous women and the women movement to really raise awareness on these challenges and the work being done. And I think it's time now to shift the burden and also to let the actors in the conservation sector, whether policy makers or practitioners, also to increase their knowledge really and capacity to understand women's rights, linkage to environment, look at gender-based violence and also linkage to environment in general. Why are we the ones carrying the burden always? So we need to shift that burden as well and shift the learning. And I think I'd stop there and also have Ida and
no, thanks, Edna. That was actually, one very important messaging, and I think I'm really happy that you bring it up. It is seen that it's a gender issue, so it's usually the women organization or women are leading that movement, and that burden needs to be shared. I think having seen that, it's 70 plus years for the UN human rights, you have the CEDAW, a lot of human rights instruments, a lot of gender policies at the international level. And though that burden of seeing that this is a priority should also be seen by all stakeholders and organizers, governments, parties, member states, whoever it is. I think that's very well said, that it's not an issue for women to take upon on women, but we need the larger movement to address the issues of women's rights, including on gender-based violence. And for all the attendees, we wanted to kind of bring in this dialogue to address specifically on also looking at the larger context of gender-based violence in the environmental sector, which sometimes gets unnoticed. And I think we won't really have the time today, but it's such a big iceberg. Like we're talking about conservation, and we are just doing the conservation aspect of it, but we still have to discuss on sustainable use and the role of women in sustainable use, access and benefit sharing for women, which still is lacking. Just respond to some of the questions I see on the chat, and Joom, I think. So one comment that Shruti Ajit has asked is that, thank you, Edna and Ida, for bringing up the issue of protected areas, especially with the 30 by 30 conservation that's going on. Issues of gender-based violence within exclusionary conservation are often left out when spoken about increasing protected areas. I think that is just a comment, but just adding to that, if any of the speakers would like to also respond to, you can take the floor or respond on the chat. But I think when we're talking about conservation or environment, we are also talking about only protected areas. At least in the context of the CBD, you also have discussions around mainstreaming biodiversity in different sectors. This could be including agriculture, tourism, mining, and energy. And these are also projects that highly impact on the lands and territories of indigenous peoples, but also has a very adverse impact on the security and the lives of women and girls. I think I will I am just going to see for the, I'm happy that there are more comments coming up. If one of the speakers would also like to comment, please take the floor, but I'll just read out some of them quickly. There is a message from S.A. Nelson, hopefully I've pronounced it, who mentions that, thank you, I wonder the work you do also involves changing attitudes, both women and men, such as assertiveness training, changing of mindsets, or other training content. If not, is there a need? I think I will let one of the speakers talk about it. I think all of the speakers do have programmings on that, but either you or June is talking about whether you have gender sensitive training that you also include and targeting men, if you'd like to share that experience.
Yes,
Ida
thank you
and
for-
Leia. Yes, please. Okay. Ida, you first, and then June.
Yes, thank you for that question. I think that's very important, the training on attitude change for both men and women, because that is key in how we can change people's attitude, change their mindset. And in terms of gender-based violence, that's the way forward in our trainings. So in our work, when we go down to the communities, besides doing community conservation resilience initiatives and activities, we also talk about gender-based violence, because here in the country it's very common and it's prevalent. Like I've mentioned earlier, that we have cases in the rural areas. So that's why it is very important in our projects and in work in biodiversity conservation. We have to also put those gender issues in our work. And yeah, thank you for that. That's very important. And we have to, all our organizations working with people in the communities, it is very important for us to do that. And that's one of the ways, the best approach to change people's behavior and attitude towards women especially. And then to know, to change the mindset about doing gender sensitized training integrated in our work. Thank you, Tina.
June, would you like to take that same question? Okay. Yes, please.
Yes. I think this question is very good now, and it's very much relevant to our experience here in Thailand now. My organization, we have been working on these issues now, working on the rights of women now for more than 20 years, but we have never been successful now in changing, the society, the men in accepting the role of women in the communities, in trusting in the women. But in the past 3 years now, we have tried to change our approach now, because in the past we only said we work for women's rights now, and in all our trainings now we only have women now, women and women and women now. We never involve the men in our trainings and in our awareness training on gender equalities. So we realized about this experience now, and we learned from it. And last 3 years now, we started to think about this, and we started to include men in our activities now. Men, especially the male leaders now in the communities, and also the male spiritual leaders now, because in our indigenous communities, the male are considered as the leader, and also the spiritual leaders are also considered as the important actors now in our society. So the past 3 years now, we involve them in our activities. And one very how to say, one success now that we have now here in Thailand is that because in indigenous society now we have different rules and different beliefs that women cannot do this, women cannot do that. And in one indigenous communities, the Hmong indigenous communities, after the women are married out now, they are not allowed now, spiritual allowed to come back to their families now after they divorce or after become widows. No, so the past 3 years we have had many meetings and also consultation with the male leaders and also with the spiritual leaders to seek for their advice and also their help now in changing these rules now, these attitudes now towards women now, in coming back now to their home, to their families after divorce now. So because of their loves now, the loves of these men, you know, for their wives, for their daughter, for their sister, and sometimes their mother, no, they help us now to how to say, to revive now one ceremony. Now there used to be one ceremony that the Hmong indigenous group used to perform now to welcome now the women, the widow women and the divorced women to come back now, spiritual come back to stay with the family. No? And this has been revived, and now we were able to perform this ceremony and welcome at least 50 indigenous Hmong women back to their families now with the help, the support of the male leaders, the spiritual leaders, and also the parents now who understand and also who listen to these male leaders, these spiritual leaders. So I think very important that we should engage now and involve men in our women's rights movement so that we could make some change to our society and the women. Thank you.
No, thanks, Ju. Thanks, Ju, for sharing this wonderful story. And I think this is also like addressing the first is a stereotype that still exists with a lot of communities, regardless whether you're rural or urban, of just the idea of women. I mean, you know, if they get married or they get divorced or they get separated, somehow the status of the women changes. And especially in local indigenous communities, there's so much of culture that is bound within the nature or their local environment. And I think this is where you can also see a very, in some ways, good link where through a spiritual practice that you've been able to revive this kind of connection for women to kind of go back to their communities. And of course, men supporting that. And I think this is where we say the sharing of the burden, you know, there are pathways happening, but we really do need more of a larger movement to make that happen on a larger scale. But that's a really wonderful example for sharing. And thank you so much for sharing and also learning for all of our attendees who are here. Change might take 20 years, but it can happen slowly. Edna, did you also want to share on the same? Yes, please. Okay, you have the floor.
Yeah, I think Leia has also highlighted a bit and either important aspects. And of course, I wanted to add as well, changing behaviors and attitudes, which is needed in terms of transforming things, takes a lot of time. And of course, as PASEP, we also bank on using champions and also engaging all actors and everyone in the communities really to know how gender issues has linkages with conservation and also violence issue that is there. And also we are seeing progress happening, but it's slower. It could be better, but I think there's a lot of resistance because people do not understand, or maybe because the actors that are perpetrators, nobody is holding them accountable. And so I think a lot of efforts need to go in terms of raising awareness and also showing evidence, which women have been doing. But I think shifting the burden is really actors as well, increasing their awareness as well, and also showing leadership in terms of addressing the gaps that have been identified in terms of engagement with women, and also the violence linked to environment, and also discrimination and inequality happening around that. Yeah, back to you, Tina.
Thanks, Edna. I think all of you kind of also answered one of the questions that came from Gladys from Finland, who was talking about how he would like to know more about good to best practices in facilitating gender transformations in biodiversity conservation. So hopefully that has been a bit helpful. Ida, yes. Did anybody want to speak?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks, Tina. I just want to talk a bit more on Shruti Ajit's comments. Yeah, one on FPIC and the other one on Protected Areas Act.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you very much for your comment, Shruti. With regards to FPIC, or free, prior, informed consent, and big developments in our country, we have forestry policy, and it also states that FPIC must be done. So that's in the forest policy of Solomon Islands. However, the experience on the ground is that it never happens. And that's why this process is important. The informed prior, free, prior, informed process is important because it will bring everyone together and get everyone to be informed before a development happens on the land or whatever resources the government is interested in, whether it be mining or logging. So that's where that's why women or whatever development is happening on the ground, women are forgotten, and also underrepresented groups. I'm referring to people who are not landowners. Yeah, so that's FPIC is very important because it will bring everyone together. But for Solomon Islands, it is not happening on the ground. And yeah, in some communities, they do apply the free, prior, informed consent process, which is good. But on the ground, many communities no. On protected areas, for Solomon Islands, yes, it is a challenge for people in the local communities because, as I've mentioned earlier, our resources are not that, but it's enough for us, and our people are separated or on their lands, the tribal lands and so forth. So if the resources are protected under the Protected Areas Act, the people who are immediately depending on them will have to look somewhere else. So there needs to be more consultation on that before we have. But yeah, there are communities in Solomon Islands who are using this model of biodiversity conservation. And thank you, Shruti, for your questions. Thank you, Edna.
Yeah, thanks, Ida, for that clarification and for addressing Shruti's question more in detail. Edna, I see your hand raised, so please, you have the floor.
Yeah, Tina, thank you. I'd also like to add on to questions from the chat. Shruti has a question in terms of free, prior, informed consent. In Kenya, we worked for the past 4 years in terms of Indigenous people and also government actors. We worked on developing a free, prior, informed consent guideline, which we hoped would inform Kenya-led process, and also other actors could use it as well to inform their work on how really to undertake FPIC when they're engaging with indigenous people. And the experiences we've had for big conservation projects, government always complain it's costly, and so they want to bypass always. And we say bypass the process in terms of rushing things, and then there is challenges because issues that are there are not being addressed. And so now I think maybe they are learning, because we've had 2 projects on conservation by the European Union, and more recently by Finnish government, worth more than $30 million that has been cancelled because government ignored following the free prior informed consent guidelines. And I think in one session I did talk to a government official, and he said they've cancelled the project, and the group is a minority. All the other communities, local communities, accepted the project. But I said it's about inclusion. So why did you ignore the forest dependent community and said you had the consent of other communities, yet you ignore the significant community who will be more disenfranchised? So I think a lot is being still ignored, and they complain that it's costly, but I think it would be more costly to address rights infringement in future if it's not addressed. And I think also there was a question by as well in terms of how to bridge the gap in terms of development and rural level, and also issues on women. And I think it all boils down to having really respect for a self-determined development, and also looking at gender analysis, because that should be really a fundamental first step in policy development, in design, and also project design and implementation. If you do not do gender analysis to understand what are the indigenous women at the local level priorities and needs, because they know better, then what are you basing your initiative on? And I think most development are top-down approaches, and that's why we see the gaps in terms of what are happening. And also in terms of some of the good practices, of course, really a lot of enhancing understanding on the linkages between gender equality, women's rights, and conservation is important. And I think Indigenous Women's Network at different levels, and women platforms like Women for Biodiversity are also trying to raise that kind of awareness, which I think government and other practitioners are ignoring. And also I think empowering women in conservation and in this movement really to be at the front lines in terms of advancing policy, and also in informing policies. We've had examples where Indigenous women have been invited to inform national level policy on climate change adaptation. So we hope even in this new phase of biodiversity, as Indigenous women, we'll be given that space to also give our priorities as well, what we see is important to have in the policy. Yeah, back to you, Tina.
No, thanks, Edna. And I think you kind of also touched upon the next question that I see here already on the Biodiversity Management Committee. And somebody asked whether any of the, I think it's, Shimona, there's always a challenge, I think, including in your country, of having officially a representation of Indigenous peoples or local communities. Women come outside that grouping. So you might have a place for Indigenous peoples, local communities, businesses, of course, some NGOs, usually big conservation agencies. But usually when you talk about having a seat for women in such committees, this is something we have asked in different spaces. Like, for example, the Jeff National Committee, but it is still a challenge. This is something that the climate change has been doing, is asking for what is called a focal point. So usually you have a CBD focal point or UNCCC focal point, but also to have a gender focal point. But I think for some reason, I think there's still seen a division between, climate is a different and biodiversity, conservation, sustainable use as a different subject. So I think now from the ground level, the discussion is also kind of going to the global level of the CBD. If people are joining in, is the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, which is one of the Rio conventions, along with the UNCCC, the Climate Convention, the UN CCD, the Convention on Desertification. So we are contextualizing this discussion on GVB and the environmental linkages to also get the community talking about and engaging in these intersectional approaches and discussions to inform all the environmental related policies, also in particular to influence the negotiations that are ongoing on the biodiversity framework, which is set to be until 2050 under the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And a lot of the work that we have been engaging in is to strengthen the CBD's gender plan of action, which is also supposed to be adopted at the CBD COP15 together. So we are having these regular webinars and discussions to get just a community together to discuss on different issues and elements that is very important for us, we think is very important for, is a priority for us to be able to share and get the knowledge that we have within our membership, including with all of the attendees who are here today. I think we are almost reaching to almost the end. We have about an hour and a half session. So I'm again going to ask you, the attendees, if you do wish to please share your comments, please put it on the chat and we'll be able to take on. But I hope you enjoyed this dialogue. We just wanted to have this interactive dialogue to get the experiences from our members, from our colleagues or friends who are working on the ground. And of course, we still have the virtual challenge that we have internet connections problems, but we are doing our best to still contribute and engage in these processes. And I think it's really very important also to understand that the issue of gender should be a shared burden. I think this is really important for us, that this advancement of women's rights should be taken on board by all, not only be forwarded by women's organizations or constituencies. I think as we are reaching up here, I will just take a break here for 5 minutes, and I will give it to my colleague Amelia, who has hopefully to kind of revive this dialogue, is Mentimeter. So the Mentimeter link has been shared in the chat. So please have a look at it. And if you can go to the Mentimeter and you will see the screen. I'm waiting for it. So if you can go to the link of the Mentimeter, it should open it. Amelia, would you like to guide everybody through it? Is there a code to enter on the Mentimeter, or like I'm also kind of going to it? There's no, the screen is empty right now. So what you will have in the Mentimeter is a question, is what are your key takeaways from this event? So there are 3. You're most welcome to put in 1 or 2 if you are if you have 3. So could you please go to the link and just give some key takeaways that you've learned, or you think we should also address it in our next webinar, or you'd like to know more. It will also be very helpful for us. So if you can, if you're having trouble with the Mentimeter link, please let us know. We're supposed to be seeing the
Tina, they can share a code for the Menti.
There is no code to the Menti. If you go there, issue an open access.
There's no link. There's no link shared in the chat as well.
Oh, there is here. Okay, here. There is one. Oh, I should put it in the waiting room. Okay, sorry, here. If you can see it and let me know if you are having difficulty in assessing it. Are you been asking a code? Christina, you asked you need a code. Amelia, can you guide? Because for me, it just opened up.
Sorry, Tina, you share the specific link, so you don't need it, you access. If you don't, then you need a code. So it works perfectly now. We can see the question.
All right, great, thank you. So if you could take a moment and sorry, hi everybody. Hi everybody. Sorry, I think we are having a bit technical glitch. Is that Amelia is the only one who can see the screen, but it's not showing up on the shared screen. So if I would ask Claire if you can share the screen, so that just to kind of have a glimpse of that everybody may be able to have it.
Hi, Tina, can you share the link?
Yeah, the link is here, but it's only, you'll have. All right, here's the link, but no, Claire, you'll need to have the one that shows everybody's answers. All right, okay, I think if this does not work, then what we will do definitely is that we will take a screenshot of the Mentimeter and send it out to all the attendees. Yes, and please feel free to also share any important information that you would like us to see. Sorry, now I'm looking at, you'll see me looking both ways because I'm looking at the chat also now. Maria, thank you so much. We will definitely be in touch, and yes, because we also have work with coastal communities with one of our members from Costa Rica. We'll be happy to connect. And also, as a quick survey, so what I'll take the moment is, we'll try to see whether we can get the Menti up. But by the time, before we close, our colleague Claire just sent a feedback survey. If you can take a moment to go to that also, I'll keep the screen open. If you wanted to kind of go in there and give your feedback, it would be really very helpful for us. Also, please let us know in the chat if you have any concerns of us reaching out to you. That is, that if you don't want us to email you with further information, because we will be putting a post-event report, and we just wanted to make sure that we send as a follow-up to this event, we will share the event report with everybody. So I hope it's okay that you will again get one extra email from us with the report. and then we will also share the mentee meetup. I think that is it. I think we are on time, but as a closing, to all the three speakers, I definitely really want to thank you. I also want to thank our team, our technical team from the Secretariat. Claire is there from the Philippines. Amelia is joining us from Mexico. We have Daniel from upstate New York, and we have Xaviera from Spain, our interpreters, and Malay from Mexico. So just to kind of give you that we have a very diverse team with us here. And to the speakers, Edna, Jum, and Ida, if you have a minute, last message for today, if you would like to take the floor and say something, like what a key takeaway for you.
Thank you, Tina. I think first message is that within the post-2020 framework that they should embrace gender as an essential element. And I think it's important to have it as a standalone goal, even though it informs the aspirations and meeting all the other targets, that it should be considered. And I think the CBD post-2020 biodiversity framework to ensure that there's living with harmony in nature as one of its aspirations should be more progressive in advancing women's rights and also really addressing the inequality issues that ensures that Indigenous women have the same rights and to contribute and to benefit from conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Edna. Ida, one key takeaway for you. I think, Ida, did we lose you? Okay, I'll go next to June. June, your key takeaway.
Thank you, Tina. What I want to stress here now, once again, stress here is about the importance of gender sensitization, because we have had some experience here in Thailand, you know, that one indigenous woman, she got elected into the local offices, but she could not do much, you know, she could not do much. Even she's a woman and she's very aware of the gender issues, women's issues, but she could not do much because she has her colleagues, the structure, now the policies, now they are not so friendly now to gender issues, to women issues. So at the end, she decided to resign. So it's very important to work to work on gender sensitization and also to try to change the social structure to make it fair and friendly for gender issues for women. Otherwise, we could not make any change, or we could not build a just society for all the people. Thank you.
Thanks, Jum. A very important point. Like just putting, saying we elected a woman is really not only feasible if you don't have enabling environment for her to thrive. I think that's really very important, that we need to make sure that there are spaces that empowers women to be able to, flourish and go forward. This is also a learning for us. Ida, I see you back there. A key takeaway from your side.
Sorry, Tina. Sorry about this.
Okay.
Network connection. Yeah, and also I also support what Edna said before. Gender analysis needs to be also done, and also to ensure that biodiversity finance is easily accessed by
I think again, sorry, either we've lost you again. Sorry, take the floor again.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the gap in Solomon Islands is linking the linkage between government, provincial government, and all the stakeholders, women's group, and people in the local communities. I think there should be a good link there, proper link. We strengthen those links, and then this, I believe, can be done if there is a mapping exercise done in countries, so that we can connect what people are doing, and then we can, make a big network and so forth to work in this environmental sector. And yes, it is very important to have gender policies for biodiversity conservation as well. And we have CBD focal points. I really like the idea of having a gender focal point too. This would be important because that's where we can, integrate all the gender issues, and then we can also address them as well while we are trying to conserve the biodiversity. And in terms of
I think we lost Ida again. Sorry, I think this is one of the challenges that we face from getting our colleagues from the community. So while Ida will try to kind of get back, I also saw that some of you, Christina, put in your takeaway on the chat. So for others, I encourage and welcome your takeaways on the chat. So ensuring that if the Menti did not work, we'd at least have some of the key takeaways from all of you, or some of you will also be helpful to guide our future webinars, because this is a new space that we all are also exploring. There's a lot to learn from these virtual spaces, organizing it. It could be simple tools like that. So we are kind of getting our way around it. Also including, we will be having these webinars regularly next year. So if there is any other issue that you would want us to address, or you would want to be part of the speakers panel, please absolutely feel free to reach us, and we'd be happy to put something together, a sharing like this. So I hope that this was helpful for everybody and interesting. So I think also requesting if all of you wouldn't mind putting your cameras on, so Claire or Amelia will take a shot, which would put on a social media. Thank you so much for joining from different parts of the world. Thank you so much for being here. You don't know how much this means to us. We started as a very small network 2 years ago, with a very few people in the galleries of the CBD, and to see this network grow and the interest grow has been a pleasure. So thank you so much for being part of this journey. We hope to take this forward with all your support, and you have our email, so please stay in touch. I think Claire or Amelia, if you've taken a photo, I'll tell everybody to take a rest. So as a last minute, as we may be able to have 2 minutes. So from the attendees, would you want to say some of your key takeaways? If you can raise your hand, and I can give you the center stage. Please let me know if anybody has their hands up, and I will be able to, I need you to scroll the room, but anybody? I think, Christina, you already put it in your thoughts. So can I give you to say it on the screen?
No pressure, huh?
No pressure. No, I'm so happy.
Just saying thank you for allowing us to cooperate and support you. I think the Women for Biodiversity have really been a fantastic, increasingly a collaborator. We didn't know each other. We personally did, Tina, but as organization and networks, we didn't. And increasingly, we see a lot of guidance from you to WWF. And so we learn better how to support you and the voices on the ground. I'm really keen. That was the thrust of my input, is that we really need to listen to the women on the ground and forget about the clouds. I call it the clouds sometime. Nothing happens really at global level. What happens is on the ground at national and local level. So just to congratulate you, and on this very important day, you just, through this event, you just celebrated in the best possible way Human Rights Day. Thank you, Tina and everybody.
Thank you, Christina. I can take two more. Any takers? Anybody? I'm trying to see if I have any hands raised, or I'll start picking people up. Yeah, so please feel free to raise your hand if you just wanted to, have a reflection or even give us guidance. Like I said, I'm using this technology a bit later than other younger millennials, so there's still a lot of learning of, how to make this process better, how to make it a bit more inclusive, how to, outreach better. So we are always welcome for any suggestions. So I see nobody else picking up. Oh, there's Shruti. Okay, got one hand. Shruti, yes, please.
Thank you, Tina, Claire, Amelia, for organizing all of this, and the entire team. It was really wonderful and a great start to these dialogues. And maybe, hopefully, in the future, we'll have more of these. And something I've always been in awe of, it's to be a part of a sisterhood in some ways. And it's a start of that. And I've also seen that while we all come from different diverse backgrounds, there are certain things that bind us. And like Ida and Edna have shared, and everyone who have shared today, the speakers, we've found there are commonalities between a lot of our situations. And therefore, maybe future, we could have even communities being brought from like a global dialogue between communities who are facing similar things from 2 points of the world, where they both have been facing mining issues and then coming and talking about what their learnings are, what their challenges are. It'll be really great to even have those conversations. Of course, the technology has made a lot of things inaccessible, but it's with this pandemic, we've realized that technology is also something that has included a lot of people who otherwise couldn't physically be present in meetings, and in some ways it also takes away that little fear of coming into a space which is a little scary, and you're sitting in the comfort of your own house and being able to kind of talk about your experience. And that way, I'm so glad to be part of Women for Biodiversity, and I've been able to interact with such amazing people in the past couple of months. It's just fascinating. Another thing I would want to see in the future, and something which has been coming up in these conversations, are kind of a gender-sensitive toolkit. Maybe together we could build on it from our experiences, and it could be a living, breathing document that constantly keeps changing depending on people's experience. So maybe start a kind of a general structure for a toolkit, and then populate all of this and make it into a thing that all of us keep sharing and building into the rest. So
no, Shruti, thank you so much, and I'm happy that you're on board. We will take you up on that, and for others. I think that is what we wanted to do. This dialogue was, I think, my personal experience is that there've been too many of them where I'm like having to, sit through hours, and then the idea between our dialogue was to keep it really very informal, as sharing of, we all are the same space. Nobody is, bigger or an expert, but we really are as a community, and we should maybe just had a cup of tea with us, or I don't know, evening time. I'm live right now, but I won't. But the idea was to just kind of engage and to just kind of relax and have this community an open discussion of what we really want How do we see things? And also bringing spaces. So to be honest, one of our worry to organizing this event, that's why I want you to know, please give your feedback, let us know where you're from, because one of the challenges that we were a bit reluctant about is we always are being organized in events that are usually at least Asia time, nighttime. So usually like Aida and even like June, they are never able to participate just because the time zone is completely very different for us, including attending formal meetings. So as much as I've extended the invitation for them to attend, I cannot expect Aida to be getting up, leaving her baby and being online 2 a.m. in the morning, right? So the idea for this webinar was like, okay, let's see what time zone was comfortable for the speakers, and then we will accommodate the event that they will be able to attend. And I think this is in a very small way. I think one of the speakers talked about is having these meetings and organizing and seeing what works for the women at the time that they're able to effectively and contribute in a much more inclusive manner instead of being distracted, or they know what time works for them. And Shruti, your idea about the guideline, that's the toolkit is really very good. We've been meaning to do that. And like I said, I think you all are experts from different spaces. We are also learning. So please feel free to also reach out to us and say, okay, Tina, this is my expertise. I would love to support or contribute. We'll be happy to take you on, including joining us as speakers for the events. So please let us know, reach out to us on the email and let us know a little bit about yourselves, because I don't know everybody. I wanted the video to be on, so I might remember some of the faces, but maybe not all. And once again, thank you so much for joining this event. And hopefully it was interesting. And I look forward as a team for staying in touch and building this community going forward. So until the next time, I hope you'll be our regular attendees for our events. And have a wonderful day. Good morning, good evening. I think some of you are already going to sleep. So thank you very much.